The gavel was a sound like a bone breaking. It cracked through the humid air of the town square, sharp and final. Alara stood on the rough-hewn platform, not a stage for performance, but a block for appraisal. Below her, the faces of Redemption County blurred into a single, collective judgment. They were farmers, merchants, wives, and children. They were the people she had known her entire life. They were watching her be sold. Broker Tom's, a man whose sweat stained the collar of his shirt in dark, creeping maps, paced before her. He did not look at her as a person. He looked at her the way a man looks at livestock, an eye for soundness and utility. "A strong back," he bellowed, his voice oiled with false bonhomie. He gestured with a fleshy hand toward Alara. Wide-hipped and heavy-footed, built for work, not for show. A ripple of snickering went through the crowd. Someone near the front, a baker whose bread she had bought just last week, guffawed. The sound was a physical blow. Alara felt her spine stiffen. She stared straight ahead, over their heads, at the dusty facade of the general store. She focused on a loose shingle, a dark comma against the weathered wood. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. Her father stood near the edge of the platform, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on his own worn boots. He was a man hollowed out by failure, a merchant whose ambition had always outstripped his sense. This was the final price of his bad ledgers and worse investments. This was his debt, and she was the currency. A contract for 5 years of indentured domestic service to the highest bidder. It was legal. It was tidy. It was the complete and utter erasure of her. "She can cook, she can clean, she can mend," Tom's continued, ticking off her attributes like he was listing the features of a plow. "And she requires no delicate handling. A sturdy girl for a sturdy life." The word echoed in the cavern of her humiliation. Sturdy. It was the word men used for things they intended to use until they broke. A sturdy wagon. A sturdy mule. A sturdy woman. In the crowd, she saw him. Alistair Finch. He leaned against a post, arms crossed over his chest. He was not like the others. He was not laughing. He was watching with a cool, detached amusement, his lips curved into a slight, knowing smile. He was handsome, wealthy, his clothes tailored and clean in a town defined by dust and sweat. His gaze met hers for a fraction of a second, and in it she saw a flicker of something proprietary, as if he were admiring a piece of property he was considering acquiring. It made her skin crawl more than the laughter did. Tom's was trying to start the bidding. "Who will start me at $20 for the contract? $20 to settle the debts of a good man and secure 5 years of tireless labor." Silence. The heat shimmered off the ground. A dog barked somewhere down the street. $20 was a lot of money. Her father's debts were his own problem. "Come now," Tom's cajoled. "Look at the quality. Solid. Dependable." That was when something inside Alara snapped. The carefully constructed wall of detachment she had built around her heart cracked. Rage, hot and pure, flooded the void. It was a fury born of 1,000 small cuts, of being overlooked, of being judged by her form instead of her mind, of being deemed less because she was not delicate, not comely. She turned her head slowly, deliberately, and fixed her eyes on Broker Tom's. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the murmuring and the heat like a shard of glass. "I am not a mare to be inspected." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Tom's froze, his mouth half open. Her father flinched as if struck. A woman in a calico dress put a hand to her throat. For a woman, especially a woman in her position, to speak at all was an audacity. To speak with such defiance was an earthquake. The shock lasted only a moment. Then it was broken by a single, loud bray of laughter. It was the baker again. The sound unlocked the rest of the crowd, and the titters became a wave of open mockery. The absurdity of it. The fat girl on the block, talking back. Tom's face purpled. He took a step toward her, his hand raised as if to strike. "You'll hold your tongue, girl, or I'll—" "The contract is for labor," another voice said. It was not loud, but it had the flat, hard quality of a stone striking stone. It came from the back of the crowd. "It says nothing about silence." The crowd parted. A man walked through the sudden lane they created. He was tall, dressed in worn denim and a dusty hat. He moved with an unhurried economy, as if he measured each step and found it necessary. He did not look at Alara. He looked at Broker Tom's. "I represent the buyer," the man said. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "The debt is paid. The contract is settled." Tom stared at him, then at the paper. "Who are you?" "I'm here to collect what was agreed upon," the man said, his voice unchanging. He handed the paper to her father's primary creditor, a grim-faced man from the bank, who unfolded it, read it, and nodded curtly. The deal was done. Alara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was sold to a man she couldn't see, represented by this quiet, dusty stranger. The banker pocketed the paper. The auction was over. The show was done. Tom's, robbed of his finale, scowled and shoved Alara roughly by the shoulder. "Get down from there, girl. You're his problem now." She stumbled down the steps, her legs unsteady. The crowd began to disperse, talking in low, excited tones. They had their story for the day. She kept her eyes down, her face burning with a shame so profound it felt like a physical illness. She was led not to a wagon, but to the narrow, refuse-strewn alley between the Mercantile and the saloon. Her father was there, avoiding her gaze. The stranger stood a few feet away, his back to her, looking out at the main street as if giving her a moment. "Alara," her father began, his voice a pathetic whisper. "I had no choice." She looked at him then. She looked at the weakness in his eyes, the self-pity that always came after his catastrophic failures. And for the first time, she felt nothing. No love, no pity, just a vast, cold emptiness. "You always have a choice," she said. "You just never choose me." He had no answer for that. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner, leaving her standing in the filth and shadows. She was alone. The stranger was still there, a silent statue in the alley's mouth. The emptiness inside her began to fill, not with sadness, but with a cold, hard resolve. The tears that she had refused to shed in public now came, hot and silent. They were not tears of self-pity. They were tears of rage. They were a scouring, a cleansing of the girl who had once hoped for kindness, for recognition. She wept for the years of being told she was too much and not enough. Too large, too plain, too quiet, too smart in ways that did not benefit a woman. When the tears stopped, something new had taken their place. It was a vow, forged in the crucible of her public disgrace. She would survive this. She would rely on no one but herself. She would never again place her trust in the hands of a man. Not a father, not a broker, not a stranger. They were all the same. They saw you as a thing to be used or a problem to be solved. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her jaw was set. Her eyes, when she looked up, were dry and hard. The girl who had climbed onto that platform was gone. The woman who remained was made of something tougher, something that would not break, something sturdy. She would make them regret that word. Vougier. The stranger finally turned. He looked at her, and his gaze was not what she expected. It was not leering or proprietary. It was assessing, the way a man looks at a fence that needs mending or a sky that threatens rain. It was practical, impersonal. "Are you ready?" he asked. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to come from his chest. She lifted her chin, the vow still fresh and sharp within her. "Does it matter if I am?" A flicker of something, surprise, maybe, passed through his eyes. He considered her for a long moment. "It might," he said. He was not what she expected. He was older than her, perhaps by 15 years. His face was a landscape carved by sun and wind, all harsh lines and plains. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky. He was not polished like Alastair Finch. He was a product of the land, functional and without ornament. He gestured with his head toward the street. "My wagon is this way." She followed him, her small bundle of belongings clutched in one hand. She walked a few paces behind him, studying his back. It was broad, the muscles moving easily under his worn shirt. He walked with a purpose that was quiet but absolute. He did not look back to see if she was following. He assumed she would. The wagon was as unadorned as he was. A simple buckboard, loaded with sacks of flour and feed. A single, sturdy-looking horse was hitched to it. He didn't help her up. He simply waited until she had climbed onto the hard wooden seat. Then he untied the reins and climbed up beside her. The space between them on the bench felt like a chasm. He clucked to the horse, and the wagon lurched forward, pulling them out of the town of Redemption and onto the dusty track that led west, into the hills. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels, the clop of the horse's hooves, and the sigh of the wind through the dry grass. Elara kept her gaze fixed on the horizon. She was cataloging everything: the state of the road, the type of soil, the way the water had cut gullies into the hillsides. It was a habit of hers to understand the systems of things. It was a way to feel control when she had none. Finally, he spoke, his eyes still on the road ahead. "My name is Silas. Silas Blackwood." She said nothing. Her name was a brand on her soul. He had no right to it. He seemed to understand her silence. He did not press. "I run the Broken T Ranch," he continued, as if speaking to himself. "It's another 20 miles. More silence. The sun beat down on them. Elara could feel the sweat trickle down her back. "I paid your father's debt," Silas said, his tone still flat, factual. "I did not buy you." Elara turned to look at him for the first time. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What's the difference?" "The difference," he said, finally turning his head to meet her gaze, "is that a debt is a number in a book. A person is not. The contract was the only way to keep the bank from taking your father's house and sending him to the debtor's prison. It was the lesser of two evils." "The lesser evil for whom?" She shot back, her voice sharp. He absorbed the question without flinching. "For you," he said simply. "A man in prison can't protect his daughter. You'd have been left with nothing. Worse than nothing." She wanted to argue. She wanted to rage at his presumption, his quiet certainty. But she couldn't. He was right. Her father was useless, but without the thin veneer of his presence, she would have been utterly vulnerable. This was a different kind of cage, but perhaps not a smaller one. "So what now?" she asked, her voice brittle. "I am your property for 5 years. Your tireless labor." She threw Tom's words back at him. "No," he said, turning his attention back to the horse. "You're not. The contract is with me, and I'm telling you the terms." He laid them out in his plain, unhurried way. "There's a room for you at the house. It has a door. The door has a lock. The key will be yours. No one will enter without your permission." Elara blinked. A lock. The promise of a lock was a promise of a world she had never known. "You'll work," he went on, "if you choose to. The house is a mess. The books are worse. You do the work, you get paid a wage. Fair wage. Same as I pay my hands." She stared at his profile. This was impossible. It was a trick. "And if I choose not to work," she challenged, "then you don't get paid. But you'll still have your room, and you'll still get a plate at the table." He paused, letting that sink in. "You are free to leave," he said, his voice dropping a little lower. "Any time you want. The road that brought you here can take you away. I won't stop you." Her mind reeled. This flew in the face of everything she had just experienced, everything she had just vowed. A lock, wages, freedom. It had to be a lie, a more sophisticated trap. Men did not give things without expecting something far greater in return. "Why?" she asked, the word a raw whisper of disbelief. "Why would you do this?" He was quiet for a long time. The wagon wheels ground over a stretch of rocky ground. "My father used to say, you judge a man by what he does when no one is looking, and you judge his worth by the things he won't sell." He glanced at her, his pale eyes unreadable. "Your father was selling something that wasn't his to sell. I'm just setting it right." She turned away, her heart a confusion of hope and suspicion. The hope was a dangerous, tender thing. The suspicion was a shield. She held onto the shield. As the sun began to dip toward the jagged line of the western mountains, Silas pulled the wagon to a stop near a small, clear-running creek. "We'll rest the horse," he said, climbing down. Elara remained on the seat, watching him. He moved with a quiet efficiency, unhitching the horse, leading it to the water, checking its hooves. He did not ask for her help. He did not seem to expect it. He returned to the wagon and pulled a small canvas sack from under the seat. He built a small, smokeless fire with a skill that spoke of long practice. From the sack, he took out 2 pieces of dried meat and a canteen. He walked over to her side of the wagon. He didn't look up at her. He simply held out a piece of the jerky and the canteen. "Are you hungry?" The question was so simple, so direct. It was not an order or an observation. It was a question about her needs. No one had asked her that all day. No one had asked her that in years. She hesitated. To take it was to accept something from him, to trust him even in this small way. Her vow screamed in her mind. But she was hungry, a deep, gnawing hunger that was more than just a lack of food. It was a hunger for a simple, human kindness. Slowly, she reached down and took the offered items. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was rough, calloused. She expected him to stay, to watch her eat. Men watched. They assessed. They judged. Her father had always commented on her appetite, another mark of her unladylike sturdiness. But Silas did not watch. He took his own portion and walked over to the creek, turning his back to her completely. He sat on a rock, looking out at the fading light, giving her the gift of his absence. She was alone on the wagon seat. She had the food, she had the water, and she had privacy. She could eat without being observed, without being measured. Alara lifted the jerky to her lips, and for the second time that day, she cried. But these tears were different. They were not hot with rage. They were quiet, aching tears that came from a place so deep inside her she had forgotten it existed. A small, tentative crack appeared in the armor she had forged in that alleyway. A non-transactional kindness. It was a language she did not speak, a currency she did not understand. But she was for the first time in a long time listening. Ja. The Broken Tea Ranch was aptly named. It looked broken. They arrived in the deep twilight, the last bruised colors of the sunset clinging to the sky. The main house was a large, 2-story structure that might have once been handsome, but now it sagged with a weary neglect. Paint peeled from the clapboard siding like sunburnt skin. A shutter hung from a single hinge, banging a mournful, rhythmic tattoo in the evening breeze. The outbuildings were in a similar state of disrepair. A corral fence listed to one side, held up by what looked like hope and a few strands of rusty wire. The barn door was missing a plank. The whole place had the feeling of a man holding on by his fingernails. It was a reflection of Silas Blackwood himself, weathered, struggling, but not yet defeated. 2 young men emerged from the bunkhouse as they pulled up, their faces curious in the lantern light. They were lean, almost boys, with the raw, unfinished look of youth. They looked at Silas, then their eyes slid to Alara. She saw the flicker of recognition, the whispered story of the town auction passing between them. She squared her shoulders and met their gazes until they looked away, shuffling their feet in the dust. "Ben," Tom Silas said, his voice tired. Unhitched blew, and Seas rubbed down and fed. "Yes, sir," they mumbled in unison, moving to do his bidding. Silas slid down from the wagon and looked up at Alara. "This is it." It was not an apology, nor was it a boast. It was a statement of fact. She climbed down, her body stiff from the long ride. The air smelled of dust, hay, and animals. It was a clean, honest smell, different from the cloying rot of the alley in town. Silas led her to the house. He pushed open the front door, and a wave of stale, close air washed over them. The inside was worse than the outside. The main room was a chaotic jumble of male living. Plates with the dried remnants of old meals sat on a large wooden table. A pair of muddy boots lay on their side in the middle of the floor. Dust coated every surface in a fine, gray film. It was a space that lacked a center, a place of function without comfort. It was the home of a man who was too busy surviving to live. "The kitchen's through there," Silas said, gesturing into the gloom. "Your room is upstairs. First on the left." He lit a lantern on the table, and the flickering light threw long, dancing shadows across the mess. He looked around the room, and for the first time, Alara saw a flicker of something like shame in his eyes. He was seeing it through her eyes. "It's gotten away from me," he admitted quietly. Alara said nothing. She looked at the chaos, and a strange sense of calm settled over her. This was a problem she understood. This was a system in disarray. This she could fix. The key, she said. He seemed to pull himself from his thoughts. He reached into his pocket and produced an old, iron key. He placed it in her palm. It was heavy and cool. "First door on the left," he repeated. "I'll bring your bundle up." She went upstairs alone. The steps creaked under her weight. The first door was closed. She put the key in the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid clunk. She pushed the door open. The room was small and spare. It contained a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a small wooden chest, and a single window that looked out over the dark shape of the hills. It was monastic. It was perfect. It was hers. Silas appeared a moment later with her small bag. He set it down just inside the door, not crossing the threshold. "Breakfast is at sunrise," he said. "Jedediah, he's the foreman. He does the cooking. Mostly." She nodded, her hand still on the doorknob. He hesitated, as if there was more to say, but he seemed to be a man who pruned his words, cutting away anything that wasn't essential. "Good night," he said finally, and turned and walked down the hall. Alara closed the door. She turned the key in the lock. The sound of the bolt sliding home was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for her entire life. Safety. It was a foreign country. She was a tentative immigrant. She did not sleep much that night. She lay on the thin mattress and listened to the sounds of the house. The groan of the floorboards as Silas moved about below. The distant, lonely cry of a coyote. The rhythmic banging of a loose shutter. When the first pale light of dawn touched the window, she was already up. She did not go down for breakfast. The thought of facing the young hands and this new foreman, Jedediah, was too much. Instead, she went to work. She started with the kitchen. It was a disaster. Greasy pots were stacked in the dry sink. The floor was sticky. A film of grime covered the wood-burning stove. She found soap. She found rags. She found a bucket. She heated water on the stove, and she began to clean. She worked with a silent, methodical fury. It was not about seeking praise. It was not about earning her keep. It was about imposing order on chaos. It was her native language. She scrubbed the pots until the copper bottoms gleamed. She scoured the stovetop until the black iron shone. She washed the floor on her hands and knees. As she worked, she took inventory. She saw the dwindling sacks of flour, the near-empty tins of coffee. She saw the logic of the space, how it was designed to work, and how it was failing. Late in the morning, a man appeared in the doorway. He was old, gnarled like an ancient tree, with a face so wrinkled it seemed to hold the memory of every drought and blizzard the county had ever seen. He held a cup of coffee in a hand bent by arthritis. He watched her for a full minute, his eyes sharp and intelligent under bushy white eyebrows. This had to be Jedediah. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked at the gleaming pots. He looked at the clean floor. He looked at her, on her knees, scrubbing the base of the stove. He said nothing. He just grunted. It was a short, guttural sound. Then he turned and walked away. Alara was not sure if the grunt meant approval or disapproval, but it was an acknowledgement. She had been seen. She worked for 3 days. She cleaned the kitchen, then the main room. She found linens and washed them in a large tub out back, her arms aching from the wringing. She found a needle and thread and mended the torn curtains. She did not speak to anyone. She ate the food that was left for her on the clean kitchen table, always when no one else was around. She was a ghost in the house, a silent agent of order. On the 4th day, the crisis came. It started with a shouting down by the creek. Alara was beating a dusty rug over a line, and she paused to listen. The voices were tight with frustration. She walked to the edge of the rise that overlooked the lower pasture. Silas was there, along with Jedediah and the 2 young hands, Ben and Tom. They were all staring at a wooden sluice gate that diverted water from the creek into a narrow channel. The channel was dry. "The mill won't turn," Tom was saying, gesturing a small water wheel further down. "And the pasture's going thirsty. It's got to be a blockage at the intake," Silas said, his voice tight. "A rock fall, maybe." After that last rain. We've cleared it twice, Jedediah countered, his voice a gravelly rasp. Pulled out a dozen stones. The water flows for a minute, then it's just a trickle again. Something's wrong upstream. They argued about it for a few more minutes, their frustration growing. They were men of action, and this was a problem that was resisting their force. Alara watched. She had been watching this creek since she arrived. From her window, she had a clear view of its path as it snaked down from the hills. She had noticed it herself. The flow was weaker than it should be. The sound of it had changed. She had walked the banks yesterday, not for any reason other than to be alone. Her mind, always working, always analyzing systems, had filed away the details. The height of the water line on the rocks, the speed of the current, the way the eddies formed. And she had seen something they had missed. She hesitated. To speak was to draw attention, to be noticed. The memory of the auction block was a fresh scar. But she looked at the thirsty pasture. She looked at the idle mill. She looked at the frustration on Silas's face. This was his livelihood trickling away. Her safety was tied to his success. Her vow of self-reliance demanded she act in her own self-interest. And her self-interest was a functioning ranch. She walked down the rise. Her footsteps were heavy on the dry ground. The four men fell silent and turned to look at her as she approached. She felt a familiar flush of self-consciousness. She was large, plain, and out of place. She stopped a few feet away, not wanting to crowd them. She spoke to Silas, but she kept her eyes on the dry channel. "The blockage isn't here," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Silas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We know that. It's upstream. Further than you think," she said. She took a breath. About a quarter of a mile up, the creek forks around a small island of rocks. It's a natural split, but someone has changed it. Jedediah frowned. "Changed it how?" "They've been damming the secondary channel," she explained, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about the system she understood. "Not with a big dam. With small stones, placed carefully over time. They've been slowly raising the bed of the secondary channel, making it shallower. Water follows the path of least resistance. They've been teaching the creek to favor the other fork, the one that goes west, away from your land." The four men were silent, staring at her. "It's deliberate," she finished. "It's designed to be slow, to look natural, like the creek is just changing its course." Ben and Tom looked utterly bewildered. Silas and Jedediah were looking at her with a new intensity. "How do you know this?" Silas asked, his voice low. "I look at things," she said simply. "I see how they fit together. The water line on the rocks is wrong. It's too high on the western fork, too low here. And the stones in the other channel. They're not natural. They're packed with silt on the downstream side. They've been there for months, maybe longer." There was a long, profound silence. The only sound was the wind and the frustrated banging of the shutter on the distant house. Silas stared at her, and for the first time, his assessing gaze was not looking at her as a problem or a person. He was looking at her mind. He was looking at her competence. "Show me," he said. She led the way, with Silas walking beside her. Jedediah followed a few paces behind. She walked them up the creek, her stride sure and steady. She pointed out the subtle signs she had noticed. The way the moss grew, the deposition of sand. They came to the fork in the creek, and it was exactly as she had described. The main channel leading to the broken T was shallow, a pathetic trickle. The other channel, veering west, was running full and fast. And at its head, almost invisible to an untrained eye, was a carefully constructed bed of stones and packed earth, a subtle, insidious diversion. Silas knelt down and plunged his hand into the water, pulling out one of the stones. He studied it, then looked at the dozens of others that formed the submerged weir. He looked up at Alara. The surprise on his face was genuine and undisguised. It was the look of a man who had been handed a map to a country he did not know existed. "You were right," he said. Jedediah, who had been silently observing, let out a single, explosive syllable. "Huh." It was a sound of profound, grudging, and absolute astonishment. It was the highest praise he was capable of giving. Silas stood up, wiping his wet hand on his jeans. He ignored the dam. He ignored the creek. He just looked at Alara. The frustration was gone from his face, replaced by a sharp, focused curiosity. "What else can you do?" he asked. It was not a command. It was not a challenge. It was a question, an open door. And in that moment, standing by the diverted creek, Alara felt something shift inside her. She was not a sturdy girl. She was not a contract. She was not a problem. She was a solution. The question hung in the air between them. What else can you do? That evening, he showed her. After a silent supper, a meal Jedediah had cooked but Alara had made possible by cleaning the kitchen, Silas lit a lantern and led her not to her room, but to a small office off the main living area. It was even more chaotic than the rest of the house. A roll-top desk was buried under a mountain of papers. Invoices, receipts, letters from the bank crusted with angry red ink. "This," Silas said, with a sweeping gesture that encompassed the whole mess. "This is what's killing me." He sank into the chair behind the desk, running a hand through his hair. The weariness in him was a palpable thing. "I'm a rancher," he said, his voice low and rough. "I understand cattle and grass and weather. I don't understand this." He tapped a stack of ledgers. "I know I'm losing money. I know the ranch is bleeding out. But every time I look at these books, the numbers add up. I can't find a wound." He looked up at her. The trust in his eyes was a heavy weight. He was handing her the fragile, beating heart of his life and asking her to find the sickness. "Jedediah told me what you said," he continued. "I see how things fit together. Can you see this?" Alara looked at the desk. The chaos of paper did not intimidate her. It was just another system like the creek. A flow of numbers instead of water. A system that had been deliberately, cleverly broken. "I can look," she said. For the next 3 days, the small office became her world. She did not clean it. Instead, she organized it. She sorted the papers into stacks. Income, expenses, correspondence, bank notices. She laid them out on the floor, creating a physical map of the ranch's financial life. Then she opened the ledgers. The handwriting was neat, the columns of numbers precise. On the surface, everything was in order. But Alara was not looking at the surface. She was looking for the subtle diversions, the carefully placed stones that were teaching the money to flow in the wrong direction. She worked late into the nights, the lantern hissing beside her. Silas would leave food and coffee for her by the door, never interrupting. Jedediah would peer and occasionally grunt and leave. The young hands watched her with a new, wary respect. The woman who had fixed the water was now wrestling with the ranch's ghosts. On the third night, she found it. It was not one big thing. It was 100 small things. A pattern hidden in plain sight. The cost of feed, bought from a single supplier in the next county, was consistently 20% higher than the market rate. A small enough margin to go unnoticed, but over 2 years, it added up to a staggering sum. There were invoices for repairs that had never happened. A new well pump. A re-roofing of the bunkhouse. She had been all over the ranch. She knew the pump was old and the roof was patched. They were phantom repairs paid for with real money. And the cattle sales. The numbers were always slightly off. A sale of 20 head would be recorded as 18. 2 steers vanished into the ink. It was death by 1,000 cuts. A slow, methodical bleeding that was designed to look like bad luck and poor management. But the most damning thing was the name. On the disbursement authorizations for the inflated feed costs, on the payment receipts for the phantom repairs, on the notes approving the cattle sales, was a signature, neat and confident. It was the signature of the man who had been acting as Silas's advisor, the man who had helped him secure the loan that now hung over his head like a guillotine. Alistair Finch. Alara sat back in her chair, the ledger open in front of her. The pieces clicked into place. Finch wasn't waiting for the ranch to fail. He was making it fail. He was driving Silas into ruin so he could call on his loan and take the land and its precious water rights for himself. The diverted creek was not a separate act of sabotage. It was part of the same, patient, ruthless plan. She felt a cold anger settle in her stomach. It was the same coldness she saw in Finch's eyes at the auction. He was a man who saw the world as a collection of assets to be acquired and people as tools or obstacles. Silas was an obstacle. She had been a tool he considered acquiring, then dismissed. She gathered the relevant papers, the ledger pages, the fraudulent invoices, a map of the ranch she had found on which she had drawn the true and diverted paths of the creek. She found Silas on the porch, staring out into the darkness. He had been waiting up. "I found it," she said. She didn't need to explain. He followed her back to the office. She laid the papers out on the desk under the lantern light. She didn't speak. She let the evidence speak for itself. She pointed to the inflated prices, to the invoices for work not done. And then she pointed to the signature, again and again. Alastair Finch. Silas stared at the name. He stood very still, but she could see the muscles in his jaw bunching. The silence in the room was dense, heavy. He had trusted this man. He had considered him a neighbor, a friend. The betrayal was a wound deeper than any financial loss. "The creek," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "That was him too." "Yes," Alara said. "He's been playing a long game, starving the ranch of water and money, pushing you to the edge so he can push you over." Silas slammed his fist down on the desk. The lantern jumped, and the papers fluttered. The violence of the act was shocking in such a quiet man. "That son of a bitch." He turned, his face a mask of fury, and started for the door. "I'm going to go see him." "No," Alara said, stepping in his path. He stopped, surprised by her audacity. "Get out of my way, Alara." "No," she repeated, her voice firm. "You can't." Before he could argue, they were interrupted by the sound of an approaching buggy. Its jaunty pace was entirely out of place in the tense night. A moment later, a voice called out from the yard. "Silas, you home?" Silas and Alara exchanged a look of cold dread. It was the voice of Alastair Finch. He appeared in the doorway of the house, silhouetted against the night. He was dressed for an evening in town, his clothes immaculate, a confident smile on his face. "I was just passing by on my way from a meeting at the Grange," he said, his voice smooth as polished wood. "Thought I'd see if you needed anything." He stepped into the main room, his eyes adjusting to the light. Then he saw them, standing in the doorway of the office. He saw the lantern on the desk, the ledgers, the scattered papers. He saw Alara, standing between Silas and the door. His smile did not falter, but it tightened at the edges. His gaze flickered to Alara, and a look of dismissive condescension entered his eyes. "Well now, Silas," Finch said, his tone oozing false charm. "I see you put your new help to work. Keeping the books, is she?" He took a step closer, his eyes raking over Alara in a deliberately insulting appraisal. "I trust she's as sturdy as advertised," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial murmur. "Good with numbers, is she? Or just good at heavy lifting?" The insult was clear. He was reminding Silas of where he had gotten her. He was putting her back in her place, a piece of property, a fat girl from the auction block. He was asserting his social dominance, reminding them both of the world outside this ranch, a world where he was powerful and they were not. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. The shame was a physical blow, as sharp as it had been in the town square. But then she looked at Silas. He was no longer looking at Finch with hot rage. He was looking at him with a dead cold calm. He had seen the truth in the ledgers, and now he was seeing the man who wrote them. The trap had been sprung, but it was Finch, not Silas, who was caught in it, and he didn't even know it yet. Finch's words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was smiling, a predator pleased with his own cleverness. He expected Silas to be flustered, to be ashamed. He expected Alara to shrink, to crumble. She did not. She held his gaze, her expression unreadable. She had faced worse than his casual cruelty. Silas took a half-step forward, placing himself slightly in front of her. It was a small, protective gesture, but it shifted the balance in the room. "She's good with the truth, Alastair," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Turns out she has a real talent for finding it, even when it's buried deep." The smile on Finch's face faltered. He glanced again at the papers on the desk, a flicker of unease in his eyes. He had underestimated the situation. He had underestimated the woman. "Well," he said, recovering his composure with an airy laugh, "every ranch needs a good bookkeeper. I just came by to see if you'd heard the latest. The bank is getting nervous about your loan. Talking about a review." He framed it as a piece of friendly gossip, a warning from a concerned neighbor. It was a threat. "I'll handle the bank," Silas said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Of course," Finch said smoothly. He tipped his hat to Alara, a gesture of mocking politeness. "Ma'am." Then he turned to Silas. "You know where I am if you need any help." He walked out, his footsteps confident on the porch boards. The sound of his buggy retreating faded into the night. The moment he was gone, the rage returned to Silas's face. He turned to Alara, his hands clenched into fists. "Now, I'm going after him." "And do what?" Alara said, her voice sharp and clear. She did not move from the doorway. "Ride over there and punch him? He'd have the sheriff on you before you got back. He wants you to use your fists. That's a fight he knows how to win. He'll paint you as a brute, a thug who can't manage his own affairs and attacks his neighbors. He'll use it against you at the bank. He'll use it to ruin you." Her logic was a bucket of cold water on his hot anger. He stopped, breathing heavily. She was right. A physical confrontation was exactly what Finch wanted. It was a trap. "He can't get away with this," Silas snarled, gesturing at the damning evidence on his desk. "He won't," she said. Her voice was filled with a cold certainty that surprised even herself. "But we have to be smarter than him. We can't fight him on his terms. We have to fight him on ours." She stepped back into the office and tapped the ledger with her forefinger. "We fight him with this, with the truth. But we do it quietly. We gather more proof. We make a case so solid that when we bring it to light, he has nowhere to run." Silas stared at her, the fury in his eyes slowly being replaced by a grudging respect. He saw the intelligence in her, the strategic mind that saw 3 moves ahead. "We need more than just these papers," she continued, her mind already working, fitting the pieces together. "We need an affidavit from the feed supplier. We need someone to measure the creek flow officially. We need to find out where the phantom cattle went. We build a fortress of facts. And when it's ready, we don't go to him. We go to the magistrate." She looked up at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "We can do this," she said. "But you have to trust me. You have to let me lead on this." There was a long silence. He was a man used to being in charge, to solving his own problems with his own 2 hands. She was asking him to put his fate, the fate of his family's legacy, in her hands. In the hands of a woman he had known for less than a week. A woman the world saw as worthless. "We," he said, his voice soft. He was repeating her word. He had noticed it. He had noticed the shift from you to we. It was the sound of a line being drawn, of an alliance being forged. He looked from her determined face to the evidence she had uncovered. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, Alara," he said. "We do it your way." The word "we" settled between them, a foundation stone for everything that was to come. A quiet partnership was formed in that messy office under the light of a single lantern. A rancher and the woman he had bought to save, now allied to save him. The next weeks were a quiet, tense battle. On the surface, nothing changed. The work of the ranch went on. But underneath, a silent war was being waged. Alara became the strategist. She directed Silas, telling him what she needed. He rode to the next county and found the feed supplier. Armed with Alara's proof of the overcharges, he confronted the man, not with threats, but with a simple choice: a signed affidavit detailing Finch's scheme or a lawsuit that would ruin him. The supplier, a weaselly man caught in his own greed, chose the affidavit. Silas, on Alara's instruction, hired a surveyor from 2 counties over, a man with no ties to Finch, to officially document the illegal water diversion. Alara, meanwhile, dug deeper into the books. She started a new, clean ledger, documenting the ranch's true financial state. The numbers, when honestly recorded, were not good, but they were not hopeless. She identified areas of waste, renegotiated supply costs, and created a budget that was brutal but realistic. For the first time in years, the bleeding began to slow. Finch was not stupid. He sensed the change. Silas was no longer seeking his advice. The easy flow of money from the broken tea had dried up. He saw Ilara moving about the ranch with a new purpose, saw the way the hands, even Jedediah, now looked to her for direction on household and supply matters. He saw a partnership where he had intended to see a master and a servant. His attacks became less subtle. The rumors started first. They slithered through the town of Redemption like snakes in the grass. Silas Blackwood had fallen under the spell of the fat woman he'd bought. She was a witch, some said, who had ensnared him with dark arts. Others whispered that she was a grasping opportunist, manipulating a simple rancher to get her hands on his land. Her past at the auction was dredged up again and again, each telling making her seem more pathetic or more conniving. The story of her defiance on the block was twisted from an act of courage into proof of her insolent, unnatural character. Then came the direct sabotage. A 50-foot section of fence was cut one night, and a dozen of Silas's best yearlings vanished. There was no proof it was Finch, but everyone knew. A few days later, a small outbuilding used for storing harnesses and tools mysteriously caught fire in the middle of the night. They put it out before it could spread, but the damage was done. Finch used his influence. The county sheriff, a man who owed Finch favors, paid a visit to the ranch. He questioned Silas about the accidents, his tone implying that they were the result of Silas's own negligence. He made notes in a small book, his eyes lingering on Ilara with open suspicion. The law itself was being turned into a weapon against them. The pressure was immense. The town looked at them with suspicion. The young hands grew quiet and jumpy. The ranch, which had just begun to stabilize, was once again on a knife's edge. Through it all, Ilara worked. She recorded every incident, every loss, every rumor in a separate journal. It was more evidence, another brick in the wall she was building. But the constant barrage was taking its toll. The breaking point came on a cool Tuesday afternoon. Ilara had ridden into town with Jedediah to pick up supplies. While Jedediah was loading the wagon, Ilara went into the mercantile to buy thread. Two women were talking by the fabric bolts, their voices low. "It's a shame," one of them, the baker's wife, said. "Silas Blackwood used to be such a respected man. Now he's letting that creature run his life. They say the ranch is a disaster. It's her fault, you know. She's a curse on him. I heard Finch offer to buy him out, to save him from himself," the other woman added. "But he refused. She's got her claws in him deep." They fell silent the moment they saw Ilara. Their faces registered a brief flash of panic, then settled into masks of cold judgment. Ilara stood frozen, the spools of thread clutched in her hand. The words were like acid, a curse. It was what she had feared most. It was the deepest, darkest belief she held about herself, that she was a source of trouble, a burden, a walking disaster. She had brought this down on Silas. The rumors, the fires, the sheriff. It was all because of her. She turned without buying a thread and walked out of the store. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her back. The shame was a suffocating blanket. They were right. She was the problem. Finch had ignored Silas until she arrived. She was the variable that had caused all this escalation. If she were gone, maybe Finch would back off. Maybe Silas would have a chance. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Jedediah seemed to sense her turmoil, occasionally glancing at her with his shrewd, worried eyes, but he said nothing. That night, she made her decision. She would leave. It was the only way to save him. She would disappear into the night, just another stray, and free him from the curse of her presence. She waited until the house was dark and quiet. She packed her few belongings into the same small bundle she had arrived with. Her heart ached. This place, this broken ranch, had started to feel like the only home she had ever known. The room with the lock, the quiet respect from Silas, the grudging approval from Jedediah. They were treasures she had not known she was seeking. But she could not be the reason for its destruction. She scribbled a short note, leaving it on the clean kitchen table. "Thank you. I am sorry." She crept down the stairs, her heavy feet silent on the board she now knew by heart. She reached the front door, her hand on the latch. Going somewhere. The voice came from the shadows of the porch. It was Jedediah. He was sitting in a rocker, a rifle across his lap, as if he had been waiting for her. He didn't look angry. He just looked old and sad. He knew. He had seen the look on her face in town. Before she could answer, a shout came from the direction of the main barn. Fire! The word ripped through the night. A hellish orange glow suddenly bloomed against the dark sky, painting the underside of the clouds. The main hay barn. It was full. It was the ranch's winter lifeblood. Jedediah was on his feet in an instant. Damn him to hell, he rasped. And he was running, not towards a fire, but towards the bunkhouse, shouting to wake the hands. The chaos was immediate. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, pulling on boots and shirts. Silas burst out of the main house, his face grim in the flickering light. Alara stood frozen on the porch, her bundle clutched in her hand. Her plan to flee, her quiet sacrifice, seemed pathetic and small in the face of this roaring catastrophe. Silas saw her then. He saw the bundle in her hand. His eyes, wild with the fire's reflection, locked onto hers. In the midst of the chaos, he walked straight to her. "You were leaving?" he asked, his voice raw with smoke and disbelief. She couldn't lie. She nodded, her throat tight. "I bring you nothing but trouble," she whispered, the words torn from her. "They're right. I'm a curse." He reached out and grabbed her arm. His grip was not hard, but it was absolute, an anchor in the swirling madness. "Trouble," he said, his voice low and fierce, cutting through the roar of the flames. "Alara, you're the only reason this ranch is still standing. You're the only one who saw the truth. Do you think he's doing this because of you? He's doing this because he's losing, because we are winning." He pulled her closer, his eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with the fire. "I have heard the whispers in town. I have shut them down. I have told them what you are. You're not a curse. You're the best thing that has ever happened to this place. To me. I will not let him run you off. I will not let you run yourself off." He needed her. The ranch needed her. The we was real. The truth of his words, the fierce, protective loyalty in them, shattered her doubt. She was not the cause of the problem. She was the heart of the resistance. She dropped her bundle on the porch. "What do we do?" she asked. And just like that, she was back. Not as a victim, but as a commander. Her fight was here. The hay barn was an inferno. Flames licked 100 feet into the night sky, a roaring testament to Finch's desperation. The heat was a physical wall, pushing them back. The sound was a living thing, a dragon's breath of consuming rage. "The horses!" Jedediah yelled, pointing toward the adjacent stable. "If the embers catch the roof, we'll lose them all." Silas was already moving, organizing the frantic hands. "Ben, Tom, get the pump wagon from the creek. Jedediah, get the animals out of the stable. Everyone else, form a bucket line from the well." They moved with a desperate energy, a small, determined army against an unstoppable foe. Alara stood for a moment, her mind racing, calculating. The barn was a total loss. The hay, their entire winter feed, was gone. The goal now was containment. Save the other buildings. Save the animals. She ran to the house and came back with wet rags, pressing one into Silas's hand. "For the smoke," she said. He nodded, his eyes already scanning the scene, assessing the new reality. As the hands worked to move the terrified horses from the stable, a section of the barn's blazing roof collapsed inward with a deafening crash, sending a shower of sparks and flaming debris into the air. A scream cut through the roar. "Billy's in there!" Tom shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the stable. A beam came down. "He's trapped." Billy was the youngest of the hands, barely 17. Silas's head snapped around. He was about to run toward the stable when a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Alistair Finch, a bucket in his hand, his face a mask of performative concern. He had come to watch his handiwork, disguised as a helpful neighbor. "Silas, the boy is lost." Finch shouted over the noise, grabbing Silas's arm. "You have to save the breeding stock. That prize stallion is worth more than 10 ranch hands. The boy is replaceable. Prime stock is not. He said it quietly, a piece of cold, practical advice from one businessman to another, certain that in the chaos, only Silas would hear. But Alara heard. She was standing only a few feet away, and in a momentary lull in the fire's roar, his words reached her, clear and cold as a winter grave. Replaceable. It was the philosophy of his entire life, distilled into a single, monstrous word. People were assets or liabilities, replaceable parts in a machine of profit. Silas looked at Finch's hand on his arm, then into his eyes, and he saw the man for what he truly was. Without a word, he shook off Finch's grip with a violence that sent the other man stumbling back. He didn't hesitate. He didn't weigh the cost of the stallion against the life of the boy. He tied the wet rag Alara had given him over his face and charged into the smoking, groaning stable. Silas, no. Alara cried out, but he was gone. Jedediah and the other hands, seeing his action, redoubled their efforts, throwing buckets of precious well water onto the stable roof to give him time. Finch stood watching, a look of pure disgust on his face. He could not comprehend it. The choice was illogical. It was poor business. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The stable groaned, threatening to collapse. Then, out of the swirling smoke, Silas emerged. He was half carrying, half dragging the boy, Billy, who was coughing and sputtering but alive. A large, smoldering beam lay across Silas's own back, which he seemed not to notice until he had cleared the doorway and handed the boy off to Jedediah. Only then did he collapse to his knees, his shirt burn away, his back a landscape of angry red burns. Alara rushed to his side. He had chosen life. Unhesitatingly, he had chosen his people over his property. In that single act, he had proven his worth in a way no ledger ever could. And in that moment, Alara's commitment to him, to the ranch, to their fight became absolute. It was no longer about her own safety or vindication. It was about his. It was about preserving this goodness in a world that contained men like Alastair Finch. The fire was the end. The loss of the hay, coupled with Silas's injuries, was the final blow. 2 days later, the notice arrived. Finch was calling his loan. The foreclosure hearing was set for the following week at the county courthouse. It was over. Finch had won. The day of the hearing, the courthouse was packed. It felt as if the entire population of Redemption had turned out for the final act of the drama. The same faces that had watched Alara on the auction block were now here to watch the dismantling of the Broken T. There was a buzz in the air, a mix of pity for Silas and a grim satisfaction in seeing a proud man brought low. Finch was there, of course. He sat at the front with a slick, smiling lawyer from the city. Finch himself looked solemn, a portrait of reluctant duty. He nodded gravely to people he knew, the concerned landowner forced to take unfortunate but necessary action. Silas sat at the defendant's table. His back was bandaged, and every movement was stiff with pain. Beside him sat a local lawyer, a timid, overwhelmed man who had already all but admitted defeat. Alara sat in the front row, directly behind Silas. She carried a single, heavy leather portfolio. The magistrate, Judge Morrison, was an old, stern man with a reputation for fairness and a deep intolerance for theatrics. He called the hearing to order. Finch's lawyer was smooth and efficient. He presented the loan documents, the clear evidence of the debt. He presented the records of missed payments. He painted a picture of a ranch in disarray, mismanaged by a man who was, regrettably, out of his depth. It was an open-and-shut case. Therefore, the lawyer concluded, Mr. Finch has no choice but to foreclose, to recover his investment. Finch then stood, his voice filled with false sympathy. Your Honor, if I may, I have known the Blackwood family for years. It pains me to do this. In light of the circumstances, I am prepared to forgive a portion of the debt and offer Mr. Blackwood a position managing his former herd, under my supervision. I only want what's best for the land. It was a masterful performance. He was not just the victor. He was the benevolent victor, the savior. The room murmured with approval. Judge Morrison looked to Silas's table. Mr. Blackwood, does your counsel have a response? Silas's lawyer stood, shuffled his papers, and cleared his throat. Your Honor, we do not dispute the debt. A sigh of finality went through the room. However, a clear voice said. Every head turned. Alara was on her feet. I would ask the court's permission to speak. The room erupted in whispers. Who was this woman? The fat girl from the auction? What right did she have? Finch's lawyer was on his feet instantly. Objection, Your Honor. This woman has no standing here. She's a mere employee. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Silence. He peered down at Alara over his spectacles, his expression intrigued. On what grounds do you wish to speak, madam? On the grounds of a counterclaim, Your Honor, Alara said, her voice steady and strong, filling the silent room. A counterclaim of fraud, conspiracy, and deliberate sabotage against Mr. Alastair Finch. The room gasped. Finch's face went rigid. This is an outrage, his lawyer sputtered. I will be the judge of that, Morrison said, his eyes fixed on Alara. Proceed, but be warned. This is a court of law, not a stage for accusations. I understand, Your Honor, Alara said. She walked to the front of the courtroom and placed her portfolio on the witness stand. Mr. Blackwood does not dispute the debt, she began, her voice calm and measured. It is true that the Broken T Ranch is failing, but it is not failing due to mismanagement. It is being murdered. For the next hour, she laid out her case. Her weapon was not rhetoric or emotion. It was logic. It was data. It was the irrefutable truth she had painstakingly assembled. She presented the ledgers, showing the neat columns that hid a slow and steady theft. She presented the fraudulent invoices for the phantom repairs. She presented the signed affidavit from the feed supplier, which the judge read with a deepening frown. She unrolled the surveyor's map, showing the illegal water diversion, documented and notarized. Mr. Finch was not just stealing Mr. Blackwood's money, she said. He was stealing the very water from his land. She presented her own journal, documenting the cut fences, the missing cattle, the fires. A string of bad luck, she said, that always benefited one man. The mood in the courtroom was shifting. The pity for Silas was turning into a dawning horror. The respect for Finch was curdling into suspicion. Finch's lawyer tried to object, to dismiss it all as the fanciful ramblings of a disgruntled employee, but Alara's evidence was too meticulous, too overwhelming. Finally, she came to the fire. I would like to call Mr. Jedediah Croft to the stand, she said. Jedediah walked to the stand, his old body stiff but his eyes clear. Alara questioned him simply. Mr. Croft, during the fire at the hay barn, did you overhear Mr. Finch say anything regarding the boy, Billy, who was trapped in the stable? Jedediah looked directly at the magistrate. He said the boy was replaceable. He said the horses were more valuable. A wave of revulsion went through the room. Alara turned from Jedediah and looked directly at Alastair Finch. Her voice was quiet, conversational. Mr. Finch, you have presented yourself as a master of business, a man who understands value. Tell me, sir, what is the value of a loyal hand? What is the value of a clean water source? You looked at this ranch and saw only an asset to be stripped. You looked at the people who worked it and saw them as replaceable. You looked at me. She paused, letting the weight of the moment build. And you saw a workhorse, a sturdy piece of property to be bought and used. She took a step closer. Your entire case, your entire life, is built on a single, fatal flaw in your logic. You believe that a thing's price is the same as its worth. And you are wrong. Finch had been sitting rigid, his face pale. But this, the personal attack from this woman, this thing he had dismissed so easily, was too much. His polished veneer finally, catastrophically, cracked. He surged to his feet, his face contorted with a rage that was ugly and pure. He pointed a trembling finger at her. Ew, he spat, his voice a venomous hiss that carried to every corner of the room. This is all because of you. A fat, worthless stray Silas dragged in off the auction block. You have no place here. You are nothing. The words, filled with classist, sexist, visceral contempt, hung in the silent courtroom. It was his confession. In that single, uncontrolled outburst, He had proven everything Alara had just accused him of. He had shown the entire town the true nature of his soul. He had confirmed her accusations far more effectively than any ledger or map. Alara did not flinch. She simply looked at him, then turned to face the magistrate. She had said all she needed to say. Alastair Finch had just lost, and he had no one to blame but himself. Gee, the silence in the courthouse was absolute. Finch's vitriol echoed in the space he had emptied of all other sound. The townspeople stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. They had witnessed the polished mask fall away, revealing the rotten core beneath. Judge Morrison's face was like granite. He removed his spectacles and polished them slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Finch. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "you have made your position and your character abundantly clear." He banged the gavel, the sound now not a crack, but a boom of judgment. "The foreclosure petition is dismissed with extreme prejudice," he declared. "All financial agreements between Mr. Finch and Mr. Blackwood are hereby suspended pending a full criminal investigation." He looked over at the county sheriff, who until that moment had been trying to make himself invisible at the back of the room. "Sheriff," the judge commanded, his voice ringing with authority, "take Mr. Finch into custody on suspicion of fraud, arson, and conspiracy." The sheriff, seeing the undeniable shift in power, hurried to comply. As he placed a hand on Finch's arm, the disgraced man seemed to collapse inward, the arrogant posture gone, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. He was led away, sputtering protests that no one listened to. The moment the door closed behind him, the courtroom erupted. It was not loud cheering. It was a low, powerful rumble of conversation, of collective realization. It was the sound of a story being rewritten, of a verdict being rendered not just by the court but by the community. People who had pitted Silas now looked at him with respect. People who had scorned Alara now looked at her with something approaching awe. Alara stood alone in the center of the room, the portfolio of evidence still clutched in her hand. For a moment, she felt dizzy, the wave of public approval as disorienting as the wave of public shame had been. She had fought with truth as her only weapon, and for the first time in her life, it had been enough. She felt a touch on her back. It was Silas. He had come to stand beside her. He did not say a word. He did not need to. His presence was a quiet, solid statement. We did this. He did not try to claim her victory as his own. He simply stood with her, a silent guardian of her triumph. His hand on the small of her back was not possessive. It was supportive, a brace against the overwhelming tide of the moment. Weeks passed. The Broken T Ranch began to heal. The investigation into Finch uncovered years of predatory practices against other small ranchers as well, and the case against him grew insurmountable. The story of Alara's stand in the courthouse became a local legend. The town, in its own quiet way, sought to make amends. The baker left a fresh loaf of bread on the porch every morning. The mercantile owner gave them a deep discount on supplies. Men from neighboring ranches showed up one Saturday, unasked, and helped Silas and his hands rebuild the burned barn, their hammers a rhythmic apology. They treated Alara with a profound, almost fearful respect. She was no longer the fat girl from the auction. She was the woman who had faced down Alastair Finch and won. The ranch itself was slowly coming back to life. With the financial bleeding stopped and the community's support, the future no longer looked like a cliff edge. It looked like a long, hard road, but one that was passable. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting long golden fingers across the healing pasture, Alara was sitting on the porch steps. She was mending one of Silas's shirts, the simple, rhythmic work a comfort to her. Silas came out of the house and stood beside her. He was quiet for a long time, watching the same sunset. His burns were healing, leaving angry scars across his back that he would carry forever, a reminder of the choice he had made. Finally, he spoke. "The lawyers say that with Finch's assets frozen, the court will likely award damages to us. Enough to clear the debts. Enough to start over." Alara nodded, not looking up from her sewing. "That's good." "It is," he agreed. He hesitated, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. She looked up. It was a legal document, a deed. She took it from him, her fingers brushing his. She unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the legal language, the precise descriptions of boundaries and water rights. Her mind, so adept at seeing systems, understood it instantly. He had deeded half of the Broken Tea Ranch, the house, the barn, the creek, the north pasture, to her. Elarahale. Her name, written in clear, undeniable ink. She looked up at him, her heart hammering in her chest. She could not speak. "This isn't a gift," he said, his voice careful, deliberate, as if he were choosing each word from a great distance. "This is your share. You earned it. You saved it. More than half, if we're being honest." He knelt down on one knee so that he was at her level, his pale eyes looking directly into hers. The position was one of supplication, but his gaze was one of equals. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said, his voice dropping lower, raw with an emotion he could not completely hide. "I'm not asking you for anything you don't want to give. I'm asking you to stay." He looked away for a moment at the land that was now theirs. This place was just a piece of dirt and wood before you came. You made it a home. For me, I'm asking you to choose to stay. As a partner. As home. The wall she had built so carefully around her heart, the vow she had made in that filthy alleyway, did not just crack. They dissolved. They washed away in the face of this profound, unconditional respect. He was not giving her a home to possess her. He was acknowledging the home she had already built and asking to live in it with her. She looked from the deed in her hand to his earnest, weathered face. She saw the future there, a future of hard work, of shared burdens, of quiet companionship, a future she could choose. "I'm not leaving," she said. Her voice was thick, but her words were clear. "I am home." It was not a promise made from necessity or gratitude. It was a declaration of fact, a choice, an arrival. A slow smile spread across Silas's face. It transformed his harsh features, wiping away the years of weariness. He stood up and held out his hand to her. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. They stood on the porch, side by side, looking out at the last light fading over the hills. The newly constructed frame of the barn stood as a dark silhouette against the bruised purple sky. He did not release her hand. His rough, calloused fingers were intertwined with hers. A silent, solid connection. The world had tried to define her by her size, her gender, her market price. It had deemed her worthless. But here, on this broken, healing land, she had discovered her true value. And it was priceless. She had not been rescued. She had rescued. And in doing so, she had found the one thing she never thought she would have. A place to belong. A place to stand. A home. Chosen. Earned. And shared.